You can see why I gave John a fairly demanding briefing. You know that when you have somebody of tremendous capability, you give them a fairly high barrier to jump, and well done, John. I'm proposing now, we'll say, could we get the slides back to the start? And we'll work through the slides one by one, so that if anybody wants to ask a question just relevant to that slide, we can work through the paper again. So, Mary, could we get them? Yeah, thanks. John, I'll just kick off with a simple question. Just leading on from your last comment, with many farmers actually incorporating, would it make sense to have one or two experienced business people dropping in 2 or 3 times a year to ask them, to ensure asking the what-if questions, you know, about governance, about managing risk, about succession, about, you know, are they developing, you know, good teams, all those kind of questions?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a benefit maybe in any business of people coming in who have experience. It doesn't have to be in the same type of business, but can just push back with a bit of background knowledge on, have you thought about this? And I suppose the only challenge, there are obviously in farming and in dairy farming, there are specific regulatory risks, whether it's environmental, whether it's the animal medicine stuff that certainly people from outside farming mightn't get, but you know, you should be getting those and putting them up front and center. But yeah, I mean, in the PLC boards I'm involved in, it's a huge part of what boards do now, is having a huge risk management process with 3 lines of defense, from the management in business units themselves, then the internal auditor, then the external auditor. We would do specific, for example, in DCC, we distribute huge amounts of oil and gas. So health and safety, environmental measures around our oil and gas distribution business, a huge issue. We would audit all of those as we go. They'd be up there as big risks. If a truck crashes with a load of gas, the impact can be significant. We have Seveso sites, import sites. So you focus on those big ones. And part of what a board does with the management in these businesses is push back to the management on, have we got all the risks written down, and more importantly, have we got actions about mitigating them based on their potential level of impact on the business today.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, I challenge you there to actually take note of, in terms of what John is saying, apply it back to your own business. Just take note. We'll say some of these things, are you actually doing them? And if you're not, perhaps just even take note. We'll say these are actions you certainly should be doing. Just by the way, if anybody's taking down details of the slides, we'll post them up on the Positive Farmers website, we'll say, so you needn't bother doing it. So now, questions on the essence of management, which John said, you know, even still he refers back to that slide. Any questions in that area? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear?
Yeah.
Okay. Michael, you, in discussion a few days ago, you were anxious and worried that John's paper mightn't necessarily transfer across to a farmer audience. I think we needn't worry about that. It was an excellent template in successfully running a business. But a few words sort of sprung to mind as he went through it. And the ones that really, 4 words really jumped out at me: focus, leadership, planning, and people. And interestingly enough, watching a documentary on Warren Buffett a week or 2 ago, when he and Bill Gates met for the first time, they were both asked to write down one word without comparing until after they had written, and the word was focus. And very early in John's presentation, the word focus, of the buzz management words, the first word that appeared in John's presentation was focus. So maybe I'd like them to come back to that issue of focus, how to focus, and then dealing with the other ones. You know, people obviously leading a team, and the openness of leading a team, and not necessarily needing to take credit for what's achieved. I thought that really came through strongly in John's presentation. The epitome of top leadership is not needing to be credited with the success yourself, but allowing the success to permeate right through the team. But where he really got intense, and I was watching him very, very carefully because it was an enthralling presentation, but where John really got intense and changed his own body language was on the issue of planning, on the issue of really project management, planning, and focusing on that element. He changed. There was a really perceptible change in it. And I just would love him to come back to that piece about the time and quality and cost. He specifically mentioned those three things. And, indicators, knowing the risk. So the planning piece, John, I want you to focus on that. Is there such a thing as luck in running a business, be it good or bad? You sort of half indicated that there was a stroke of luck or good fortune in the cheese plant in Idaho. But maybe it isn't only luck, it's planning as well. And then finally, the little gem, disagree but not being disagreeable as management. That aspect of it, challenging your team, but in a positive way, challenging them. And, be clear about what you do, but not how to make sure that you know what you do and letting others know what you do in the team and expecting them to do. And finally, the work-life balance. It's a buzzword. It's talked about. People pay lip service to it. But I just think it is a crucially important element. And I know you sail, and in your busy life, you still find time to sail. So maybe finish off with that.
That was about 10 questions.
Was that typical Mike McGann?
By the way, he's chairing the next session, but he already wants to be sort of voted the top chairman. He's nearly summed up for me already.
Like there's an interesting theory around leadership that the leadership in not an autocratic dictatorial style is kind of over, and I we've seen some stark examples of where that didn't work out in Ireland. There is a theory that I subscribe to that the leader is the servant of the organization, that it's about a humility around leadership. And humble people don't think less of themselves, they just think about themselves less. You know what I mean? And if you approach leadership in that way, because at the end of the day, the essence of this, go back to the three, is that you've got to achieve the task. You've got to get this done. And as you got to get bigger, you've got to get it done through other people. And therefore, you've got to get people to go with you. And therefore, communicating, being open, why we're doing what we're doing, I think, all the time, and looking for feedback. Like organizations now do a lot of stuff, where they're big organizations, on employee engagement. And are people really engaged with the organization? Or are they not? They just turn up, clock in, clock out. And you'd like people to turn up with their heads and their hands and contribute. So if you're not engaging people, you're not going to get the best out of it. You're not going to get value for money if you want to be really mercenary about it. On the planning thing, I think the planning thing is one of the crucial things. People have asked me over the years what made a difference that we did better in Glanbia. Planning would be one of them. We just got better at it, and when we saw the Idaho thing, we also saw the whole trend, the big global trend in health and wellness, that people were getting into health and wellness, eating better, going to gyms, taking protein, but we hadn't any money to do anything about it. So we had to earn the right to do something about it, but to plan our way through that in terms of getting out of sets of businesses, deploying the capital, all that in planned steps. Couldn't borrow any more money, couldn't raise any more money. So for that reason, planning and thinking about scenarios, it always seems to me is worthwhile. And every business that I'm involved in today, once a year, as a board, the management team will have done it. They sit down and do an update of the rolling 3-year or 5-year plan. And then the first year of that will be our annual business plan for next year. And you do that on a rolling basis, updating it for risks, changes in the environment, new opportunities, whatever. But it's a rolling planning process that's alive and dynamic, because there's such a pace of change in the world today. I think unless you're doing that in a way that's not distracting but is adding to the business, you run the risk of getting left behind. And then the people bit is crucial, and the work-life balance plays to that. If you can't get people who don't have a right balance these days, they're just going to want to do something else. And why would you, And particularly in Ireland for the next number of years, this is an economy approaching full capacity. I don't know what full employment is today. It's probably more than 3 to 4%, because there are lots of jobs have gone that haven't been replaced by technology. So people who aren't trained, we will probably see a blip. Full employment could be something around 4% unemployment rate. So the economy is approaching capacity. So getting and keeping good people was never more crucial. There's a war for talent going on from the largest corporation to the smallest business today. And therefore, I'd say getting and retaining the best people you can, that's a big challenge.
Mary, could we have the next slide, please? And could I just ask you, in terms of we flash up slides...
You don't need to ask a question on every single slide.
Exactly. Don't ask a question. We've time for 6 or 7 questions, so just ask if you really... if nobody has an appropriate question, we'll pass on. Okay? Nobody questions? Next slide, please. Horizons. Earning the right. Yeah, down at the back. Anybody else a question on this? By the way, hands up, because there's a fair bit in that one. Okay.
I wanted to
Yeah.
focus.
Yeah.
So about the 5th slide in.
Yeah.
So and Mike asked it, John, just in terms of focus, how to keep the focus. And one of the challenges for maybe our industry now is that quotas are gone. There's a focus on growth, and as we know, growth can be very good, but has a lot of issues also. So how can we keep the focus on what the right targets is? Because there's a danger we'll just push up cow numbers. There's a danger we'll just chase production. There's a danger we'll push up stocking rates and look for and lose maybe our true focus. So how do we maintain that through the ups and downs of a volatile market?
There's a fairly fundamental point here, is that you need to be clear about what returns do you expect out of the business, either the core business you have today or any new business you might get into. And you've got to be fairly disciplined about whether, if you're going to change that, why are you going to change it? Will you be prepared to accept lower returns? So, for example, in DCC, we have we have about 14 billion sterling of turnover. We make 2% on the bottom line, but we make returns on capital in the high teens. And that's what we focus on. How do we really sweat the assets to deliver high conversion of cash? And so therefore it's almost irrespective of the business. So we're very clear that we have very simple businesses delivering heat and oil and gas. We drive as close to 90% conversion of EBITDA to cash, and then we recycle that into new opportunities where we're very clear about minimum levels of return. Okay? So therefore, it seems to me, if you focus on growth, I used to say a lot one time that turnover is vanity, profit is sanity. So therefore, it's crucial to keep that in mind. Getting bigger for the sake of being bigger is increased complexity, more cash absorption. Are you going to get incremental returns from it that you're going to be satisfied with? And being clear about what you require from those over the medium and longer term. I think that's the way to keep the right focus on it, Kevin.
Yeah, question for all of you, have you total clarity about why you're in business and exactly what you expect out of the business? And I mean, that's something we'll say that if you haven't, you should. Question down at the back on the same slide, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. Just to go back to the first slide where you say develop individuals. I was just wondering, how do you go about that? Do you plan to develop every individual in your business, or do you prioritize who you develop? Because obviously you've got time as well as financial constraints to all of this.
I think that's fair. I think you probably start with the assumption that you've got people in the business. If you brought them into the business, you had a certain set of criteria on which you brought them into the business. And it seems to me these days it's good to bring people into a business in a role, however junior or senior, that have capacity to develop, however you define that. They're reasonably bright. If you want a quantitative measure, did they do a couple of A levels? Did they get 300 points in the leaving cert or 600 or whatever? They have potential for development. Because if you have capacity to keep them in the business then, and they may stay in the business, then it's better and they will feel more motivated if you can develop them. And that's, I think, I had some conversations with Pat Dillon last year about the whole labour piece and how do you structure in dairy farming opportunities for people to grow and therefore stay in the industry. So in developing people, certainly in organisations that I am or have been involved in, down through 4 or 5 levels down, you can start with a fairly simple template of what's an individual's strengths, what are they good at, and they need to keep honing those, and then what are their development needs? Are there 1 or 2 things they need to work on? And you could focus on those and either work with them yourself or let them out to get a bit of training to address those needs. But they'd be pretty focused around the role they're in and the role they might have, but they need to get better at 1 or 2 key things and keep and build the strengths they have. You can have all sorts of grids and charts on this stuff, but I've always kind of focused on, if you sit down with someone and have a conversation twice a year, what are your strengths, what have you done well, what are you doing well, what do you need a bit of development on, and what could you do better, and how can we help you to get up there? Now, of course, ultimately, if people can't or won't or are unwilling to get involved in developing and dealing with their weaknesses, then you may have to take them off the bus.
Okay, Mary, could we switch on those slides, please? Just at where we are at ADM. It's next one, please. Stick up your hand if you have a question. So, anybody? Okay, we'll move on. Points. Yeah. Colin, up here in the middle.
Thank you very much. Colin Brosnan here. I don't have a question on one particular slide, it's more around all of the slides. John, there's some great stuff up there, but how do we get farmers more familiar with these kind of practices? If they've heard of them before, or if they've read about them before, how do we give them the opportunity to actually practice this? Because some guys will have heard this before and they're not doing it. How do we get them on that journey to all farmers are actually running their business with these principles in mind?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it probably, it's probably in an area, maybe focusing on a few things, particularly in the era we're in now. It seems to me that having approaches where people could learn more about good disciplines around planning for development might be a good way to start. I think people getting some approaches around project management are always worthwhile disciplines. And financing growth are worthwhile disciplines. You don't have to try and learn everything overnight. So I think about, if I thought about planning for growth and development of your business, why wouldn't, programs happen around that? And how could that be done is a separate question. Project management is a good discipline in anything, however small. You get something done, ideally, ahead of time and below budget, because you've applied good principles of project management, you're really adding value in any business circumstance. And it's a good way to think about how you implement your plan, it seems to me, if you break it down into a series of projects over time, and you know who's responsible. And then financing growth. I kind of come from a background where management accounts are crucial. And I think it goes back to that cockpit point about, You know, what are the right balance of dials you want to have up in the cockpit with you when you're flying the plane, when it's climbing? What happened? What's likely to happen? Where the projects are? I mean, that's not difficult stuff. You can decide that yourself. Any individual can work that out, I'd say, for their own business.
Yeah, John, if you're looking at any project or whatever, like it's big, it's daunting. You said something about break it down into small, manageable bits.
Absolutely.
Just elaborate a wee bit on that one.
But like most projects can be broken down into identifiable chunks. I mean, the classic project is building something. So, you know, you're going to build a building, it's going to cost €500,000. The project sequence of time has to take account of the planning process, the design, execution of planning, the contract, a contractor. Is it direct labor? Is it foundations, the walls, the roof, the fixtures, the fittings? All the sequencing of all of those in a project plan is the essence of it. You've all probably done it. You've all probably done it unconsciously. But it's a really good discipline about making sure the worst thing you can have, and always costs money, and we did a lot of it over the years, if without the disciplines of planning, well, then you can end up, the thing takes twice as long, can cost twice as much, and you get about half the benefits out of it. You want to avoid that one.
Yeah, we have a question down at the back, yeah.
John, you're talking about in your horizons of growth, you're talking about the different levels and operators, but as a dairy farmer where you're fulfilling all three different roles, how do you manage? How do you allocate those different things, and how do you create skill sets within yourself? In a corporate environment, you can go and hire it, but how do you hone those skills within one individual?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that struck me when I was writing these down. I think it's a real challenge. I think I do, and it comes back to a point Michael made at the start. I think depending on the scale of what you're at too, it's worthwhile that you have a team. You see, your team doesn't need to be full-time. You know, have you got one or two people that you can trust to challenge, that you can be open and straightforward with, that have experience, that can challenge your plans, think about the future, challenge you about why you want to go from A to B, and what's it going to look like when you get there, how you get the resources for it, how you're going to manage on the way, and challenge that, are you at best cost today before you leave the station? Is the business, the core business at the start, have you got that really humming? And if you haven't, why haven't you, and what do you do to fix that? So I would think about, maybe for each of those, thinking about priorities, because it's very often easy to get seduced about some great piece that's out in the future. And there's a time with bad planning, we can all be a builder of great hockey sticks, you know, that if we get through the next 3 years, the next 2 would be really brilliant. But the reality is that if you don't put enough attention into the detail of how you run the business in the next year or 2, you actually won't have the resources, and the hockey stick will turn down the other way, and that's the danger. So just to be practical about it, even if you had someone, you know, if you get someone to do your books as an accountant, would you be picking somebody who could actually do more than do your books as a business advisor and be commercial and challenge you in some of these points and help? Do you have some other advisor? And then what are the areas you want to work on yourself, and then having priorities and keeping a focus on those? But it's a good question, because I think you need to compartmentalize those in your head. And if you can't do that, well, don't worry about that. You know, that's, you know, not everybody is going to do all of this all the time and in the same sequence. So it's keeping the right stuff in the right proportion at the right time.
It's probably, John will say, trying to ensure you have somebody to bounce ideas off.
Yeah.
And it may not be the same person
Exactly.
in different areas.
Exactly.
Yeah, I tell you that.
And trying to build a network of people like that, particularly in a growth business, is probably really useful.
I'll take 2 more questions. We'll say that so We forget about moving slides. You're you're less disciplined than that anyway, so we'll give up. So any two last questions? Yeah, Kevin. Yeah.
John, you mentioned there about high-performing teams, and certainly what always seems to come across when I hear you speaking is your own bit of humility. So you implemented a 360 feedback in Glanbia. How did you personally take feedback, negative or positive feedback, and where did you seek it from? Was it from people you respected, or was it down along the line?
No, you do it the same as everybody else in the team. I took it from 360 feedback is where you get people to give you feedback on your performance from above you, beside you, and below you. So colleagues, a boss, someone you report to. So if I remember at the time, I would have got the chairman to fill in for me as I reported to the chairman. Colleagues that worked beside me and people who reported for me, and a couple of external people that knew me. And that's powerful stuff, 360 feedback. It's often not, there's lots of online models you can do now, but it's actually the comments people write under different areas that are really insightful,
What makes it most powerful? Why is it powerful?
Well, the comments then can be really the truthful bit as to what people really think in particular situations, as to how you behave. And therefore, it can give you a real insight on your own style and your own leadership style. And if you remember when I talked early on, if your leadership style isn't open and you get, someone gives you feedback, say you play the cards very close to your chest, well, how are you going to communicate with people that you want to do difficult things, and the reason why we're going to do it? It feeds into all of that.
So just from ourselves as farmers' point of view, maybe working on our own, who or how should we seek this from? How do we? It's really a self-development thing in terms of trying to develop yourself as well as working with others.
And it could come from people that work for you, maybe, if you're prepared to do that. Could come from groups you're involved in, from a couple of people in that who see you contribute or not, where they've got an opportunity to say, I don't know, whether it's someone that would be realistic and clear, and gets the opportunity to tell you confidentially what they really never had the courage to tell it to your face. But that's the value in it, Kevin. It's more difficult for farmers as a solitary occupation in inverted commas. But if you think about it, could be someone in the local GA club that you were on the committee with. Same thing can apply. What was he like? I thought he was a desperate whatever. But
I take one more question down there.
Hello.
Yeah.
John, just a question. We talk about planning, but actually, whenever you set your plans out, whether it be 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, whatever, how actually close did you get to the plan at the end of the term? And people that don't usually do a lot of planning would see that if you don't actually achieve the plan, maybe that was actually failure in doing the plan in the first place. Whenever actually the evaluation of the process during the term was actually more important than any. Given that, the reasons why you've deviated from that plan, do you see that as changing going forward from maybe people or legislation or climate change? What are going to be the triggers that why we may well have to change a plan going forward?
Yeah. No, that's a good point. No, I mean, a good discipline, which I think in all of the businesses I'm associated with, what we do is every year we go through the planning cycle. It's maybe a 5-year outlook, debates around the key businesses, all of that, set of plans, set of financials, and then there'll be the budget for next year. But the following year, when we do the plan, we will compare it to the plan for the prior year as to how close were we. How did 17 actual outturn compare to what was in the strat plan for that year? And that's a good discipline that if people are not being realistic about understanding the environment, changes, the marketplace, whatever, well, that defeats the whole purpose of the planning thing anyway. So it's a useful little check to come back and review the next set of numbers against that, particularly across key metrics. And then changing the plan. Well, look, there was, I think it was Napoleon that said, few plans survive first contact with the enemy. Like for me, it's as much about a process as the plan. It's about thinking about your business and the environment of which it's operating, and what do you need to do to evolve your business to cope with a changing competitive environment. Remember the first slide or the second slide. The essence of strategy or the essence of planning is coping with competition. So therefore, if you're thinking about it, you will have to change because there's a regulatory change or whatever. So how do you respond to that in the context of the business and the resources that are available to you? And you adapt the plan accordingly. And it's better to do it that way, than the Mike Tyson phrase that everyone has got a plan till they get punched in the mouth. So if you can anticipate the punch, it's always better.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, an absolute pleasure to listen to John. And just before I thank him on your behalf, could I ask you to stay after that, because we have an extra item on the session. And John has given us an absolutely marvellous talk. It's going to go up on the website, we'll say that, and there are so many things he's brought up, we'll say that, get really good people, put a lot of effort into developing people, we'll say, the people who are interested and capable of being developed, the importance of feedback, continuous feedback, the honest but respectful, the importance of planning, that the plan may not survive the first contact with the enemy, but if you're planning, you're just so much more adaptable in terms of the slightly changing the plan, will say that the importance of values, stroke appropriate behaviour, celebrate success in terms of, and that's all about people, listening respectfully, continuous feedback, will say that, communicate clearly. All of these are, they're just so valuable messages for us. That every one of those is applicable to us in terms of building good teams in our business. And there's, the importance of having the appropriate metrics, and then what are the 4 or 5 things that really lead to success? The physical things, the financial things. Do we know them? Do we track them? Are we totally on top of them? We'll say that, are we absolutely clear about, we'll say, what we expect out of the business? Is there total clarity? Every single thing of this isn't corporate. This is about any business. So I would just ask you to put your hands together for one of the best talks I've ever heard.